To start with the first panel, the panel will cover the sustainable governance in natural resources, synergies, principles, and impact stories. We would like to discuss the major impact the transparency and accountability principles had on the governance of natural resources and the role and contribution of international actors and platforms in these achievements. We have the brilliant panel speakers, and the moderator of the panel is Mr. Mark Robinson, my previous colleague, when we used to be at the OGP steering committee, and now he's the executive director of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. We are extremely grateful for your time and willingness to contribute to our conference. Mark, and please take the lead of the panel. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Georgie, for the invitation to this event. I would ask my fellow panelists, who are all joining one by one, to turn on your videos. So I have the honor of introducing an excellent panel. I think I know most of you, but I will introduce them briefly so that you online know who is on the panel. And I will then say a few introductory words and take those in the order on the program one by one to spend 4 or 5 minutes just outlining some initial thoughts on the theme of the panel. I will then introduce 1 or maybe even 2 rounds of questions, but I'll also be looking out at the chat to see if there's additional points for Q&A that anyone on the line wishes to post to the panel. So it's not just us talking amongst ourselves. So by way of introductions, let me first introduce Olena Pavlenko. She is the Global Council Chair for Publish What You Pay, a network that campaigns for an open and accountable extractive sector. Their work is incremental in pushing governments to regulate natural resource extraction in an open and accountable manner. So today, Olena will share global tendencies in this direction, major achievements, and impact stories from their work in Publish What You Pay. Next, we'll follow on with Joe Foti, who's the Chief Research Officer for the OGP, the Open Government Partnership. They recognize international initiatives and platforms play a significant role in advancing transparency and accountable principles in the energy sector, one of many sectors in which the OGP operates. And one of these initiatives to do that is the OGP itself. And Joe will be sharing his experience on the synergies between the OGP and extractives work more generally and new frontiers around the energy transition. Joe will be followed by Ferdian Yazid, who's the Accountable Mining Project Coordinator from Transparency International Indonesia. And TI's Accountable Mining Program has just published a new guide promoting beneficial ownership and integrity screening in the mining sector. Ferdian will share major findings and takeaways from this guide and tell us more about the importance the screening of companies and the people who benefit from and control them as part of the licensing process protects mining sector reform from corruption. Fourth on our list is Galip Afendiev, Eurasia Director for the Natural Resource Governance Institute, NRGI. Previous speakers would have already highlighted the importance of beneficial ownership transparency. Galip will share global lessons on beneficial ownership, particularly on the use of data to take forward and deepen transparency. And then finally on my list, Susanne Wink, she's currently member of the steering committee of the Open Government Partnership. And she runs a leading transparency organization in her home country, Slovakia. She will be talking about beneficial ownership transparency and share the Slovak example to tell us more about major achievements and needs of Slovakia in terms of the transparency of beneficial owners of companies. And as you can see, the contributions you'll hear about are not all narrowly around the natural resources governance space, but we'll also be sharing wider lessons which are applicable in this particular space. But let me just begin by saying a few words about the EITI and our current set of strategic priorities. I won't elaborate in full because I need to assume some knowledge of the EITI, and I applaud IFDI's continued efforts to see whether Georgia might sign up to join this global initiative. One of the things that distinguishes us globally is the fact we have a multi-stakeholder approach and a global standard, a set of rules and norms that govern country reporting to promote the open and accountable management of the oil, gas and mineral resources sectors. We are coming up to our 20th anniversary in 2023 and learned an enormous number of lessons over that time. And over that period have gained more members, both countries, which now number 56 members, companies, of which we have 70 members across oil, gas and mining. And the majority of our data is now accessible in an open and transparent form. As with many of our organizations on this call, the crisis over the past nearly 2 years now has had significant implications, not all of them bad over the longer term. In our sector, there was initially a major crisis facing oil and gas dependent countries because of the huge decline in prices and the falling away of demand. But countries with good resources that are strategic and of use to the new renewable sector face buoyant demand and good prospects going forward. Countries with a mix of strategic minerals and oil and gas nevertheless had significant strain on their budgets over this period, particularly at a time that they were facing the challenge of having to roll out vaccinations to their populations and feeling the strain of the need to meet essential social expenditures. In terms of a silver lining, what we've seen over this really quite narrow period of time is the diversification and decarbonisation of energy companies, many of them members of the EITI. And this has really given a big stimulus to us taking the energy transition as a major focus of EITI's work moving into our third decade. So looking forward, we now are giving particular emphasis to these twin objectives of using EITI data and the multi-stakeholder process, bringing together companies, governments and civil society to see ways in which we can further stimulate the energy transition and support countries, both those at risk of diminishing revenues and those that stand to have the benefits of increasing revenues and jobs from the mineral sector, but working through the implications of the transition for our countries. And at the same time, refocusing attention on corruption risk, because corruption risk, after all, is one of the reasons that we exist, is to help countries tackle and mitigate those risks. And new kinds of risks are now emerging with this accelerated shift towards the renewable sector. The other 4 areas that we are giving emphasis to are doubling down on the need to sustain domestic revenue mobilization through tax revenues and royalties and license fees, ensuring that the majority of our data is available and published in open data format, thinking about how we use EITI data to form decisions by investors using environmental, social and governance criteria, including ratings agencies, and giving much more attention to measuring our impact. And we've just recently launched a new independent evaluation. And then just to give you more of a sense of what the energy transition element looks like in our strategic priorities, we see 3 main entry points. One is using disclosures under the EITI's reporting mechanism to help generate information to inform policy and debates, national debates around the implications of the energy transition. The second is to support the multi-stakeholders and groups themselves to engage in informed public debate to bring a wider cross-section of the population into the discussion on the risks and the opportunities posed by the energy transition. And then looking for ways that we can mainstream transparency on the energy transition through our reporting structure and the EITI standard. And in doing this, we increasingly engage with other newer partners around, for example, the COP, when we work very closely with Chatham House and NRGI, but also looking for other venues through which we can engage other actors more directly involved in global climate discussions. And of course, with the changing composition of our industry base, looking for ways that we can support the green transition by working with them. So that gives you a flavor of some of the ways that the EITI is moving. But what you're really here to do is to listen from our panelists. So I'm going to move straight now to the first of our panelists, Olena Pavlenko. Olena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for the opportunity to talk today. So I'm happy to represent today Publish What You Pay, a global coalition of civil society organizations and think tanks, which work to ensure that revenues from oil, gas, and mining are used to drive development in the countries. We are present in more than 50 countries. We work with more than 50 national coalitions and unite more than 1,000 member organizations. As many other global organizations, Publish What You Pay is reacting on the situation in the world. The climate change, economic inequality, phase out of fossil fuels, all this will have impact on the countries where we are present, on the people in these countries, and of course on our members. That is why we defined as one of our priorities for the future to help people to go through the process of the energy transition in transparent and fair way. Just a few months ago, in September this year, we had a regional meeting of our Publish What You Pay Eurasia Coalition. And many of our members stated that the process of energy transition will be uneasy for their resource-rich countries. There will be so many questions on the table. For example, how to organize local communities where the coal phase out will take place. How to ensure that the new activities like development of critical raw materials will not start with corruption practices, or how to make companies in these new sectors more transparent and accountable than we have now with oil and gas sector. So we had a chance, we do have a chance to do this work right from the very beginning, and we must use this chance. But to be successful, civil society should not be left aside. Civil society organizations have their unique role because they can monitor different activities even at the very local level. They can promote the best practices, they can raise public awareness, and they can help to build trust among all stakeholders. But to play such role, civil society organizations should have enough tools and resources. First, they should have different benchmarks and KPIs recognized at the international level to be able to make objective comparison with the situation in their countries. And here, EITI standard, OECD standards are very helpful. As soon as EITI standard will stay flexible, and will take into account new realities with the climate change, and I'm happy that Mark mentioned this already. This will be a great help for civil society organization at the local level. Second, they should have enough knowledge to be a step ahead of their governments and to be able to lead the reforms. This is not a secret that in our region, most of the governments, they are quite bureaucratic, and many civil servants are thankful for the advices, recommendations from civil society organizations and external experts. With such cooperation, everyone will benefit. But to be able to advise, civil society organizations should have access to the knowledge platforms and trainings where the really professional issues are discussed. Third, civil society organizations should have enough resources to fight for transparency and accountability. There should be resources for legal support, for good IT tools, for institutional development of these organizations. And to stay independent, civil society should have access not to only the government money, but also to have their own sources of support internationally. Fourth, this is partnership. If you feel strong partnership with civil society organizations from other countries, international organizations, this does give you the feeling that you are not alone and you can be successful. I would like to underline that Publish What You Pay is one of such platforms for partnership, and we would be very glad to invite all interested civil society organizations to join our family. Let me stop now, and I will be very happy to discuss all other issues which will arise during this panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Elena, and also staying exactly to time. You set a very nice approach. I don't think Joe Foti is with us just yet. I'll be alerted when he does join us, but I'm going to move straight to Ferdian Yazid for your presentation, please.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name is Ferdian Yazid. I'm here representing Transparency International Indonesia. We are one of the implementer of Accountable Mining Project, particularly at the national level. So as for today's webinar, I will share a lot with all of you about our initiatives in promoting beneficial ownership transparency nationally, as well as business integrity. So in our country, actually, there is a corrupt mutual relationship between the company and the local public officials. So as the local public officials need campaign fund to fund their political rally, they need to get money from the mining companies. And oftentimes, the mining companies is one of the most prone to bribery risks. So EITI in Indonesia here has a great deal of job to promote business integrity as well as to promote beneficial ownership transparency in Indonesia level. And recently we have launched a new publication regarding integrity screening by using beneficial ownership data. And not only that, you can also use the guidance to endorse a more stronger beneficial ownership policy in your own country, because when I talk with policymakers here in my hometown, many of them stated that they won't be interested to talk about beneficial ownership transparency if you link it to the corruption issue, because it's pretty risky with them. But you can link the issue of beneficial ownership transparency with a more issue that would be caught by the policymakers, such as it will be better for your EODB score, the ease of doing business score. And as far as I know, that Georgia has a good score on that index, although the study has been postponed due to the manipulation of the research. And later in the discussion, I will tell more about you about our experience, the Indonesian CSO, to advocate a beneficial ownership policy so that it could be bought in by the government. Thank you, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ferdian. Let's move on now then to Galip Efendiler.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, the organizers, for inviting Synergies for this important and timely meeting. Very briefly, actually, looking around the panel and at the attendees, it's very clear that it's a very big family and we almost know each other. But at the same time, there could be some people that don't know yet for some reason about Synergies. Synergies is an international CSO, which is has been with the EITI probably from the first days, and we've been always hand in hand working with the EITI Secretariat, Publish What You Pay, and until this day we're part of the international board. Overall, we like to call ourselves among intellectual leaders of this whole movement, and we're trying to stay that way. And we have multi-stakeholder approach. But as Olena underlined, in some cases, and specifically for this region, we engage more closely with civil society. And in this region, our main goal is actually trying to empower civil society with knowledge so that civil society feels really as an equal partner behind the MSG table. So those empowering tools that we have, they vary between small grants to conducting analysis, research, and more thoroughly, we're concentrating on the programs of capacity building. So they could be capacity building along the line of the overall all segments of the decision chain that are associated with the natural resource governance, and then specifically with the EITI itself. But our motto is trying to show how all of those segments are actually work well if they can be seen as an orchestra, not rather just looking at the revenue transparency, but rather looking what needs to precede the revenue transparency and what revenue transparency can do for the later stages of saving, spending, investing, and so on. So overall, I think we as an organization also going through some discussions of seeing how context is changing and what this new context is bringing on the table and how we can react to it. Some people know that NRGI actually started to work towards the energy transition, and we, in years to come, we like to see that becoming one of the strategic directions for our work. And I believe later on in next year, we will be organizing several events specifically for the Eurasia region to introduce our partners to some of the intellectual materials that are being developed within our institution, how we can actually not forget about what we have been doing all these years, but rather build all our initiatives on the basis of all of those achievements and move forward in those new directions. Another important thing that I need to underline is that we're trying to be as pragmatic as possible, and we're trying to understand the context better. We have the regional programs varying from Latin America to Southeast Asia, and for each of those regions, there are specific contexts that really dictate the specific approach. And specifically for Eurasia, we are aware that sometimes transparency and accountability are not on the top of the agenda for people. Being from the region, I am from Azerbaijan, I understand that at this point, there are much more important topics on the public discussion. But at the same time, it's our responsibility to try to relate all the agenda points that we are pushing for to the actual context. And probably during the next part, when we will be going into more detailed discussion, we will have an opportunity to do that. And I'm sorry, Mark, I was not really looking at the watch, so I could actually stop here and then save all of those details for later. Thank you.
No worries. I had an eye on the watch, and again, you were nicely to time, so no worries on that. And I'd now like to invite Susanna Vink, who, as I mentioned, is the member of the steering committee of the OGP, and her organization's name in English is Currents. Susanna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mark. And also, please, if I'm too long, just cut me short, because I will be focused on the remarks. And maybe I will say a few words, wider words about OGP, as we haven't had Joe, the privilege to hear Joe. But first, let me give you a short background. I, for years, have been an anti-corruption activist, mainly in Slovakia. So I was working on the ground and involved in investigations of high-level corruption in my home country. And this experience led me to a knowledge that times and times again, we ran into the secrecy of corporate ownership that we identified as one of the major barriers to efficient law enforcement and criminal justice, as international markets and international rules for secrecy of business corporate ownership are mainly used to legalize corruption, and we have seen that these mechanisms don't know borders. So even the most progressive country needs to rely on some kind of a world consensus or a new standard around the beneficial ownership transparency. And we don't have such yet. And this brings me to my to the need and maybe my driver around the international engagement within open government partnership, where we have worked over the past years mainly to loudly and clearly making the case that we need a new global standard and consensus around beneficial ownership transparency if we want to prevent corruption and if we want to promote good governance around the world. We have been sharing good practices from member states who have been leading the way. We were connecting leaders. We served as a platform for those leaders and peer exchanges. But most importantly, we offer a vehicle for implementation of these new standards and also international scrutiny around that. And maybe just a few numbers that Joe would provide us in much more detail. I can later share in the chat the fact sheet that OGP has around beneficial ownership transparency, and I can also post in the chat box Slovakia impact story done by Open Ownership. Currently, I feel there is a good momentum, global momentum to move towards such a standard. Within OGP, there are more than 52 total beneficial ownership commitments, and currently 18 of our members are implementing commitments in this area, beneficial ownership being one of the fastest growing areas within OGP. So I really feel that more synergies and cooperation would help us all. Where I identify three major challenges is that there is still a missing consensus on public accessibility of the registers. Many countries who move forward implement registers, but they are not publicly accessible. And I can later show you in more detail what is the major difference between publicly accessible register and not publicly accessible register. We are missing a consensus on the very need to disclose ownership structures. It's still challenged around the privacy rules. And I really think that we need more cooperation, international cooperation to prove this point. And we lack a consensus on verification and sanctions. And there I can share a Slovak example, which I think is very relevant for EITI and extractive industries who work with public good, natural resources being an important public good that needs to be protected. And Slovakia sharing a systemic corruption and high-level corruption that led to even a state capture, decided to introduce a tougher register, not only publicly accessible register, but a tougher register for corporate partners who enter in any kind of business relationship with the state. So not only bids for public contracts, but also licenses and any other benefits. Those entities whose value of contracts exceeds 100,000 euro per year need to register in a special register, which is run by an independent court with specialized judges. And the companies have to can't enter their data directly, but they have to use a so-called authorized person, a notary, lawyer, or a banker, who then takes over a special responsibility and faces also potential sanctions if this information turns out to be false. I already mentioned sanctions. These are not directed only to the authorized persons, but also to the companies themselves, who, if they are caught to lie, they are being removed from the company register, meaning that they can't have any other business deals with the state. And they can even lose the current contracts, and especially fines. I can share you later on during the Q&A session the impact of this register that had not only on the domestic landscape, but also internationally, how it helped other countries and NGOs in other countries to protect the public interest. So I would stop here, very much hoping, Mark, that I haven't exceeded the time too much.
I think all the panelists, including you, Susanna, were precisely to time, so many thanks. And you'll see everyone has addressed very complementary issues. I think virtually in each of our 4 panelists' presentations, they've talked about the need to focus on the practical realities and opportunities of beneficial ownership transparency, as well as some of the difficulties of implementing open public registers in practice. And also another theme that ran through several of the presentations was on the energy transition. So I think there was some very nice synergy between my opening remarks and the focus of the panel contributions as we think through the implications for the natural resources sector. Now, I'm going to ask the panelists to very briefly respond to a question, and then I'd encourage those of you in the audience to post your questions on the Q&A, which I will then read out for the panelists to engage, and they can be directed to a particular panelist and on a specific issue. So the question I want to ask the panelists is, what stories of impact can you share with us, which you believe have made contribute to advancing transparency principles in natural resources and the energy sector? You know, what were the key factors? Was it the nature of political commitment? Was it capacity considerations? The ways in which different participants were engaged in the process? So let's take your brief thoughts on that question. I'm going to take the same order again to give the panelists a chance to prepare and respond, but be brief. Olena.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe I will use the example of my country, where I'm originally from Ukraine. How we are trying to use the transparency tool to increase governance in the natural resources sector. So I would like to say that our organizations, in partnership with many other CSOs we were proactive. We have developed a law which actually implements the EITI standards on the national level. And we are happy that this law was supported by too many stakeholders and international partners, including OGP, NRGI, EITI, all the colleagues which are here actually also knew about this case. But what I'm trying to say that this law also can be a good basis for any other countries, including Georgia and other countries in this region, to increase transparency in their sector. Now, our new case or new step is we are developing a draft law on the regulator in natural resources. So we have the draft law which should improve the transparency of the institution, which will do the licensing and monitoring of these activities in natural resources. And we are applying this draft law also to the critical raw materials sector, which I think also might be interesting in terms of energy transition. And just one more word for my dear Georgian colleagues, because Ukraine and Georgia, we are part of the Eastern Partnership Initiative. I think all these issues, EITI, transparency law, even the transparency of or creation a new transparent upstream regulator, all these things might also apply to your countries. As a part of the Eastern Partnership initiatives, that might work. And in our country, EU was one of those who supported our initiatives. And in your particular country, if I remember correctly, you have a huge share of renewables in the generation. We have cases like Albania, countries like Albania, who included EITI into the renewable sector. So there is already practice in places, and you probably would be interested in such experience. Thank you very much.
Sorry, we seem to have some extreme screen movement right now, at least on my end. Let's see if we can manage this. Ferdinand, please come in.
Yeah, so about our experience, the Indonesian CSO, in promoting beneficial ownership transparency. Actually, when the Panama Papers hit the world in 2016, so there were more than 800 politically exposed persons that was recorded in the Panama Papers. However, the response from the general public was not huge. There was no a huge public protest, just like in the Iceland, where the former public minister has to resign due to the strong protest by the citizens. But however, those kind of major international event has been gradually help us in improving our beneficial ownership policy. So the Panama Papers publication was launched in 2016. In 2018, Indonesia has a new regulation which require our companies to report their beneficial owners. So the definition itself also has adhered to the international standard. So the individual who has the indirect control to the companies and has indirect control of the asset of the company should be stated as the beneficial ownership. So actually, we already on the right track. However, our policy often find many obstacles, particularly because just like what I said before, many local public officials or governor has a special relationship with the mining companies or palm oil plantation companies that has given political donation illegally. So beneficial ownership data actually could become a new ammunition for the local CSOs to know who to investigate and to know who owns the company and why a governor or local public officials decided to issue a policy that benefit the companies that has been given a political donation. So it's really useful for the local CSOs to detect such corrupt act. However, there's also many obstacles at the national level because many policymakers didn't have an anti-corruption mindset when we talk about beneficial ownership, because it just add more to their new tasks. You know, collecting the data about beneficial ownership, that must be a menial task for them, and mostly the corporate service providers such as banks, law firms, and notaries are the one who are not supporting this advocacy. So it is a really struggling advocacy. However, we also managed to have a good relationship with the Indonesian Anti-Corruption Commission that has our support to continue to push forward the beneficial ownership policy. Until now, we are still supporting the beneficial ownership central registry that will be accessed by the public, just like has been said by Susana. In our country, that has not been happened. Yeah, over to you, Mark.
Very good. Many thanks. Let's turn to Khalib next.
Thank you, Mark. It's actually a very difficult question because it's very hard as an organization working from New York or London to clearly attribute the success to us only. So anything that, for example, Olena is talking, Danilo will talk about, Alexei will be talking about, we will always try to piggyback on it, and we will try to actually attribute some of that success to ourselves. But we like to believe that, yes, we played the role in many of those particular activities that have been going around for more than a decade around the network. But specifically, I like to underline RGI, Resource Governance Index, that has been playing the role of the really go-to index that has helped our partners to, first of all, diagnose the problems, prioritize the problems, and then identify the specific recommendations to be made to different stakeholders. Another, I think, achievement that can be underlined for NRGI is the development of timely interventions in terms of the different either auxiliary courses or specifically, core courses that we have been delivering through Eurasia Hub, where we try to be as custom as possible in terms of kind of serving the specific needs of each of those specific coalitions, specific countries, either going to the countries or delivering on the regional level, where we can actually talk about those impacts on the local level through the knowledge and through that kind of empowering that we've been providing. Also, in terms of lessons learned and sharing and networking among all these peers, I think NRGI, together with Publish What You Pay, played a great role in sharing those lessons. Would that be in terms of overall EITI or very specific issues like EITI mainstreaming or EITI beneficial ownership? But of course, we can only talk about small milestones along the way that we have achieved, and there is a very long way to go in this region. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Galip. Susanna, do come in next, and I've got a question for you after you respond, which you can stand ready for. And please, those online, feel free to add to the Q&A for specific panelists. Susanna.
Thank you, Mark, very much. As I already highlighted, the main challenge for registers of beneficial ownership, if you already get so far that they are publicly accessible in your country, is the reliability of the data. I think every journalist, law enforcement officer, police person struggles with this, that the data needs to be accurate to serve the purpose. And of course, there is a big dilemma if we can on such a scale verify and sanction data, and how those mechanisms should look like. And I think what Slovakia recognized, and this is the impact I would like to share, is that when it comes to protection of public interests and high-level corruption, you can be harsher, and you need to be harsher. So I think what we can share is, first of all, the innovative design of such a register that recognizes that there is a conditionality. If you want to run a business with state, you need to be openly sharing your ownership structure, because you are accessing public funds. And if you are involved in corruption and drainage of these funds, you need to be held accountable. So as I already mentioned, this is the conditionality is the one major property of the register. The second one is that the registration can be made directly, but there needs to be an authorized person used. And in pushing through this reform, as we heard the case of Indonesia, this has not been popular. And of course, notaries, lawyers, and bankers were not supportive of this piece of legislation. But there was such a strong internal demand backed up by public and progressive politicians that it has been pushed through in quite a challengingly short time. Then what was, I think, very visionary from the minister is that the register has been given to the court. an independent court, and she made sure that the first judge to run the court was selected very well. He had an enormous background in bankruptcy law. He had a previous practice from inside the banks, so he had a very high integrity. So when he took over the register, she empowered him. The minister empowered him with a second property that anyone can challenge the data in the register by a qualified claim. So the claim needs to be qualified, and you need to be sure what you are submitting, because you will be heard by a court. But this turned out to be extremely important, because in the 3 years of existence of this register, the court dealt with more than 120 cases, and only 1/3 of them were started ex ofo. The others were based on claims. So media and NGOs, very known and respected NGOs, were playing a vibrant and a key role in implementation of this register. And what was the last very important point is that the burden of proof in these kind of dealings with the court is reversed. So if you submit a claim, it's not up to you to prove that the company lies, but it is up to the company to prove that they are telling the truth. And this was based on two notions. One is that who should have a better access to all the documentation than the company. So you are always a weaker part in these dealings. So you need you need this data and documentation, and the company should have it firsthand. And the second one is that it is important for the public interest to be protected. So there was a second notion used in this reverse burden of proof, and it has really served. It has really been proven as a very important feature of the legislation. And as I have mentioned, the court dealt with more than 120 cases. Half of them have been stopped during the court sittings, which was a reaction of the companies to the due diligence of the judge and his professionality, because the companies either decided to delete themselves from the register, or there was a very miraculous change of ownership structure during those dealings which were public and the hearings that were public. Suddenly, major oligarchs who have been known publicly for years to finance and be behind the former government turned up to buying officially the shares of these companies who stood in front of the court. And a couple of companies lost their right to do the business with the state. They were deleted from the register. But what we have really achieved was that we now know even the major oligarchic structures behind Slovak companies, which belong to the most influential. And the law enforcement domestically has a much stronger position to work with. And I also mentioned that the Slovak case or the Slovak register turned out to be, for example, crucial in the investigation of Czech Transparency International investigation into their prime minister, who was alleged from conflict of interest. He is also an influential businessman. His companies receive European Union subsidies, and there is a strict conflict of interest legislation in Czech Republic. And based on publicly not available beneficial ownership register in Czech Republic, the Czech TI couldn't prove that he is really the owner of the companies and he is really facing conflict of interest. And they used our beneficial ownership register because the Prime Minister has his interest also in Slovakia and his dealings with the Slovak public funds. And this was a very key moment also in the investigations, then followed up by the European Commission, where he was held accountable, and his subsidies, the EU subsidies, have been brought to questioning. So I think these are very two important impacts stories that can be, I believe that they can be used by extractive industries area and this field.
Thank you, Susanna. In fact, you've anticipated the question from David Matsuradze. So I'm not going to repeat the question now, because actually he was very much asking about some of the questions around impact of the BO register and the judicial issues around it. So you've addressed that very nicely. Thank you. I see that Joe Foti is now on the line. Joe, you've come in just at the right moment to bring you in to share your reflections for about 5 minutes, and then I'll wrap up the session. Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and apologies for a scheduling problem on my side. So I come from the Open Government Partnership. I think most people on this call would be quite familiar with OGP, but it's 10 years old this year. And it is at a critical moment. We've had 10 years of growth, and that's growth in terms of membership size, growth in terms of levels of government, with now nearly as many local governments as national, and growth in terms of inclusion and different types of groups that are organized in OGP. At the same time, as we know from the Summit from Democracy and from the most recent VDEM reporting, we're at a state for democracy that puts us back in 1989. So what, to levels where the world was in 1989. So what does this mean for the extractive industries and beneficial ownership and how all of this works? I'll try to explain really quickly, but in a sense, what does OGP and EITI have to help each other with, and all of these initiatives, is that OGP, being a voluntary initiative, can do three things. It can reinforce reforms that are caught elsewhere. It can accelerate moving up the timetable of those reforms. And it can be a place to experiment a little bit and try new, more rapid ideas in a 2-year plan. So in that sense, I think it's extremely complementary to EITI and to other transparency and accountability initiatives. So then we're facing this crisis, multiple crises, really. We have the issues of climate and energy. We have the problem of kleptocracy. We have the problem of civic space and journalists being clamped down on. So as we reach our 10-year period in OGP, and we think about the future of beneficial ownership, which has gone from one country, the UK, announcing its beneficial ownership transparency register in 2013 in OGP, to now, I believe, nearly 50 members doing some form of beneficial ownership transparency reform in OGP. We're faced with this question then of, can we actually make it mean something in a world where people are being harassed for using it, or where governments are, maybe they publish the data, but you can't question the data. You can have your passport taken away if you do so, et cetera, et cetera. So at our 10-year anniversary, it's an important moment for all of us to think not just about the release of data, but to pivot towards democratic accountability. And so what does that mean? I think it means three things. First, it means that we do need to we need to strengthen in OGP. And when we talk about beneficial ownership and all of these issues, we need to strengthen lines of horizontal accountability. And so I'm pleased to say that more and more there's discussion. And last week, the steering committee passed a rule that should focus some parliamentary energy on democratic oversight of the executive and how that's working. I think that's great. I think Georgia's taken some early first steps on hidden debt that are interesting, that intersect with this work. The second one is, of course, strengthening what goes into elections, improving political integrity. And I'm really proud to say that some of the folks on this call, but also more general, we're going to be putting out a big report on political integrity, and not just beneficial ownership transparency data, but how does it actually interoperate with other forms of data, such as politically exposed persons asset disclosure. So people can use that. And then the final one, and know who's making which decisions. And the final one, of course, is strengthening civic space. People have to be able to use it. Journalists have to be able to report on this. Right now, there's not enough of these commitments in OGP. I will be very frank with you. So the question is, how do we scale these up to reinforce other initiatives? Otherwise, you can release all the data that you want, But if people can't question where it came from, question how it's used, look at whose family is there, use the courts, then we're not going to get very far. And so that's where I'd say that we need to go in the next decade based on where we've gotten so far.
Joe, admirably focused. Many thanks. Great you could join us. So that is the last of our panelists on this session. We've had just the one question from one of the participants. There's a few resources in the chat, and clearly a conversation that really has vibrancy across our organizations and the context we work in, which is really exciting. I'm going to give a shout out for a major new initiative that we've been co-hosting with our partner Open Ownership, which specializes in beneficial ownership reform. And we've just a year ago launched something called Opening Extractives, which is one of the most ambitious of its type in terms of deepening capacity for building public registers of beneficial owners in 12 countries around the world. And we're just getting into the phase now of deep technical engagement with high levels of political engagement and media attention. So I hope we'll see other similar initiatives at scale, because the opportunity is huge, but also the challenges are great. So thank you to our panelists for joining in today. I hope our more than 50 participants have found this a valuable exchange. And it's for me now to hand back to Georgi to close the session. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Mark, and to all panelists. And I'm happy that Joe made to join us. It was really interesting discussion, and I believe the impact and success stories discussed during the panel will be inspirational for our participants and different stakeholders from different countries. Actually, I myself took lots of interesting information for Georgia to further advocate EITI and beneficial ownership. Actually, recently we had the publication regarding the beneficial ownership in Georgia and Visegrad states, and we will be sharing this publication in English together with the guidebook for monitoring the beneficial ownership transparency for those who would like to do that. So thank you, Mark, especially to you for interesting presentation and also taking the role of moderator and agreeing for participating in this conference. I think this panel was very interesting. We had brilliant speakers and presenters, and I hope that we will continue the same way for the two other panels as well.